My name is Candace. I'm 29 years old, and I'm standing at Mr. Morrison's funeral holding an envelope that's about to destroy everything I believed about my life. My parents spent decades screaming at me to stay away from our neighbor, insisting he was dangerous, a threat to our family. But as I open this envelope filled with photos and documents, my hands won't stop shaking. Everything my parents told me about him was a lie, and the real danger was sleeping under our roof all along. Before we dive into this incredible story of deception and hidden truths, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's dealt with family secrets too? Please hit that like button if you believe the truth always finds a way to surface, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you questioning everything. Now, let me take you back to where this twisted tale began, because what happened to me might be happening in your neighborhood right now. I was only 7 years old when Mr. Morrison moved into the house next door to our suburban home in Connecticut. I remember that day clearly because it was the first time I saw my parents react with such immediate, visceral fear to another human being. My mother grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises, yanking me away from the window as the moving truck pulled up. "Stay inside, Candace. That man is dangerous," she hissed, her face pale as sheet paper. My father was already on the phone, his voice low and urgent, talking to someone about the new situation next door. From that moment on, our household transformed into something resembling a maximum security prison. My parents installed cameras on every corner of our property, all aimed at Morrison's house. They put up a higher fence, added motion sensors, and even hired a security company to patrol our street at night. When I asked why we needed all this protection, my mother would only say, "Some people aren't who they pretend to be, sweetheart. We're keeping you safe." The strange thing was, from my limited observations, Mr. Morrison seemed like the most ordinary man in the world. He was in his early 40s, tall with graying hair, and always wore neat button-down shirts. He worked from home, tended his garden on weekends, and waved politely at neighbors who passed by. But whenever he tried to wave at us, my parents would rush me inside like we were under attack. Late at night, I'd hear my father in heated arguments on our front lawn. Through my bedroom window, I could see him and Morrison facing each other, their voices carrying in the quiet suburban air. My father would point aggressively, sometimes even pushing Morrison's chest, while our neighbor just stood there, taking it all without fighting back. These confrontations happened at least twice a week, always ending with Morrison walking back to his house with slumped shoulders. My mother's mental health deteriorated rapidly after Morrison's arrival. She developed panic attacks that would leave her gasping on the kitchen floor whenever his name was mentioned. She quit her job at the bank, saying she needed to be home to watch over things. I'd find her standing at windows for hours, binoculars in hand, documenting Morrison's every move in a notebook. Tuesday, 3:15 p.m., he received a package. Wednesday, 7 a.m., left in his car, returned at 7:43. When I was 9, curiosity finally overcame my fear. While my parents were at a town meeting about neighborhood safety concerns, which I knew meant complaining about Morrison, I snuck into our backyard. Morrison was planting roses along his fence, and when he saw me, his face lit up with such genuine kindness that it startled me. "You must be Candace," he said softly. "You look just like your—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk to you. Your parents wouldn't like it." That brief encounter changed something in me. I began to question why someone so dangerous would know my name, why he'd look at me with such sadness in his eyes. I started my own observations, watching him help elderly Mrs. Chin with her groceries, seeing him volunteer at the local animal shelter on Saturdays, noticing how he left bird feeders out all winter. Nothing about him screamed danger. The first real betrayal came from my best friend Melissa. I made the mistake of telling her about my doubts during a sleepover, sharing how Morrison seemed nice despite my parents' warnings. The next morning, my parents knew everything. Melissa's mother had called them immediately, and Melissa later admitted my parents had asked all the neighborhood kids to report if I ever mentioned Morrison. The violation of trust cut deep, but it was nothing compared to what came next. My parents pulled me out of public school that week, claiming they needed to homeschool me for my safety. In reality, it was complete isolation. I wasn't allowed to play outside, couldn't have friends over, and every phone call was monitored. They installed locks on my windows and an alarm on my door that would sound if I tried to leave my room at night. "It's for your protection," my mother insisted, but I felt like a prisoner. One afternoon, I discovered Morrison had been leaving small gifts at our fence line. Hand-carved wooden animals, books about brave young heroines, packets of flower seeds with notes saying, "For the garden you'll have someday." My parents would gather these offerings and burn them in our fire pit, my mother crying as she watched them turn to ash. "He's trying to lure you," my father would say. "This is what predators do." But the more they demonized Morrison, the more their behavior seemed unhinged. They went through his mail when the postman accidentally delivered it to our house, steaming open letters before resealing them. They hired a private investigator to dig into his past. They even tried to get him fired from his job by calling his employer with anonymous complaints. Their obsession consumed our entire family, turning us into the very thing they claimed Morrison was dangerous. By the time I turned 16, the prison my parents had built around me was suffocating. I'd become an expert at pretending compliance while secretly questioning everything. My rebellion started small, hidden in places they couldn't monitor. During my supervised library visits, I'd research psychology, trying to understand if Morrison exhibited any actual signs of dangerous behavior. Every checklist, every expert article pointed to the same conclusion. The only people showing concerning patterns were my parents. The attic became my sanctuary, the one place in our house my parents rarely checked. Among dusty Christmas decorations and old furniture, I discovered a box that would crack the foundation of my world. Inside were photographs from my mother's youth, showing her laughing with a man who looked remarkably like a younger Morrison. They were at beaches, restaurants, even what appeared to be a wedding rehearsal. In one photo, she wore an engagement ring I'd never seen before, gazing at this man with pure adoration. My hands trembled as I dug deeper, finding letters signed, "Forever yours, William." The handwriting matched the notes on Morrison's gifts. My mind raced with possibilities, but before I could process it all, the attic door slammed open. My parents stood there, fury radiating from every pore. My father ripped the box from my hands while my mother screamed about privacy and betrayal. They burned everything that night, the smoke from our fireplace thick with destroyed memories. "You don't understand what you've done," my mother sobbed, clutching a bottle of wine. "We've worked so hard to keep you safe, and you're determined to destroy it all." My father, already 3 drinks in, slurred about how Morrison's presence was poisoning our family. Their drinking had escalated dramatically over the years, another casualty of their obsession. They blamed Morrison for their failing marriage, their financial struggles from paying investigators, even my father's recent job loss. The second betrayal came from family. My Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, and my supposed confidant arrived for an intervention. I'd called her crying after the attic incident, believing she'd be my ally. Instead, she sat me down with my parents and explained how I was being manipulated by a dangerous man without even knowing it. "Your parents have sacrificed everything for you," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "The least you can do is trust them." I later learned my parents were paying her rent in exchange for her cooperation. A week later, fate intervened in the form of a bicycle accident. I'd convinced my parents to let me ride to the corner store, promising to stay away from Morrison's property. But a car ran a red light, sending me flying onto the pavement. Morrison was trimming his hedge when it happened. Without hesitation, he ran to me, using his jacket to stop the bleeding from my scraped knee, calling 911 with steady hands. He stayed with me, holding my hand and telling me stories about brave princesses until the ambulance arrived. When my parents showed up, their reaction was volcanic. They accused Morrison of orchestrating the accident, threatened to sue him for touching me, even suggested he'd pushed me into traffic. The EMTs looked confused as my father screamed about assault while Morrison quietly explained he'd simply provided first aid. That night, my parents filed for a restraining order that was ultimately denied due to lack of evidence. The midnight phone calls started shortly after. I'd creep to the top of the stairs, listening to my mother's hushed conversations. She's getting too old, harder to control. What if she finds out? We can't let that happen. Whatever it takes to keep the secret. My father would pace during these calls, occasionally interjecting with, "He should have stayed away. This is his fault. We had a deal." When my mother's sister Lauren visited from California, I hoped for normalcy. Instead, I witnessed a confrontation that shattered more illusions. Lauren cornered my mother in the kitchen, her voice fierce. "Sarah, you can't keep living this lie. What you did to William was cruel enough, but what you're doing to Candace is unforgivable." My mother slapped her, screaming that Lauren didn't understand, that she'd ruined everything once and wouldn't do it again. Lauren left that night and never came back. Before driving away, she pulled me aside briefly. "When you're old enough, find me. There's so much you need to know." She pressed a business card into my hand that my father immediately confiscated. They told extended family Lauren had suffered a mental breakdown, was spreading dangerous lies, and should be avoided. Most believed them. The neighborhood campaign against Morrison intensified as my parents spread their poison. They held meetings warning about the dangerous man next door, shared fabricated stories of him watching children, suggested he had a criminal past they couldn't legally discuss. Slowly, Morrison became a pariah. Kids crossed the street to avoid his house, adults whispered when he passed, and someone spray-painted "Predator" on his garage door. Through it all, Morrison maintained his dignity. He never retaliated against my parents' escalating harassment, never defended himself publicly, never even raised his voice during their confrontations. He simply continued his quiet life, tending his roses and feeding the birds, while the neighborhood treated him like a monster. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at our house with such profound sadness that my chest would ache. Whatever secret my parents were protecting, it was destroying everyone it touched. The summer I turned 18 marked a turning point in my captivity. Legal adulthood meant my parents couldn't control me through the system anymore, so their methods became more desperate. I'd been accepted to college, a small victory won through guidance counselor intervention, but my parents made it clear that cooperation with their rules was the price of tuition. Still, the promise of partial freedom made me bolder. I orchestrated my first real meeting with Morrison, like a military operation. My parents had a standing appointment with their therapist every Thursday afternoon, though I suspected they spent more time strategizing about Morrison than addressing their obvious issues. I told them I'd be at the library studying for finals, which was partially true. What I didn't mention was that Morrison volunteered there teaching computer literacy to seniors on Thursdays. Finding him between classes, I approached with my heart hammering against my ribs. Up close, I could see the years of harassment had taken their toll. His hair was more gray than brown now, deep lines creased his face, and his shoulders curved inward like someone perpetually bracing for attack. When he saw me, his expression cycled through surprise, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "Candace, you shouldn't be here," he whispered, already gathering his things to leave. "Please," I begged, blocking his path. "I need to know why my parents hate you so much." "What did you do?" The question seemed to break something in him. He slumped into a chair, rubbing his face with weathered hands. "What did I do?" he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping. "I loved your mother. I loved her completely, and I believed she loved me too. But some mistakes, Candace, some mistakes follow you forever." He started to tell me more, leaning forward with urgent eyes, when my phone exploded with notifications. 30 missed calls from my mother, dozens of texts growing increasingly hysterical. My stomach dropped as I realized what had happened. They'd been tracking my phone, probably had been for years. Morrison saw my face and understood immediately. "Go," he said quietly. "Go now, before this gets worse. I'm not worth what they'll do to you." I ran, but not fast enough. My parents were already at the library when I reached the parking lot, my father's face purple with rage. The scene they caused was spectacular, screaming about pedophiles and grooming in front of horrified library patrons. Security had to physically restrain my father when he lunged at Morrison, who'd followed to make sure I was okay. My mother collapsed dramatically, wailing about her stolen baby, while recording everything on her phone. The ride home was silent except for my mother's sobbing. Once inside, my father exploded. He swept my laptop off my desk, sending it crashing into the wall. My phone followed, then my books, my photo albums, anything that connected me to the outside world. "You want to choose a stranger over your family?" he roared. "Then you'll have nothing except family." My mother just watched, her face blank, occasionally murmuring, "We tried so hard. We tried to keep her safe." The third betrayal cut deepest because I'd actually believed Jake loved me. We'd been dating secretly for 6 months, meeting during my rare, unsupervised moments. He was my escape, my proof that normal life existed beyond my parents' paranoia. But when my father sat me down with printed screenshots of every text Jake and I had ever exchanged, including ones from that very morning, I understood. Jake had been reporting to them all along, paid to pretend to care about me. $500 a month, my father said proudly, showing me the bank transfers. A small price to know our daughter was safe. The humiliation burned worse than rage. Every intimate moment, every whispered secret, every time I'd cried in Jake's arms about my family, he'd been taking notes for my captors. When I confronted him later, he didn't even apologize. "Your parents are trying to protect you from a dangerous man," he said with rehearsed conviction. "I was helping them help you." My college dreams became another battleground. My parents informed me I'd be attending a small religious school 3 hours away, where they'd already arranged for me to live with trusted family friends who would monitor my every move. When I protested, they threatened to withdraw all financial support, report Morrison for stalking, even have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. "We've documented years of obsessive behavior regarding Mr. Morrison," my mother said coldly. "No court would side with you." The vandalism started the next week. Morrison's tires slashed, windows broken, dead animals left on his doorstep. My parents always had alibis, always acted shocked when police questioned the neighborhood. But I heard my father on the phone late at night, discussing payments and sending stronger messages. They wanted Morrison to leave town, to disappear completely, and they were willing to destroy him to make it happen. Everything escalated the night I found Morrison beaten in his driveway. I'd snuck out through my window, desperate for air, when I heard groaning from next door. He was conscious, but bleeding, his face swollen beyond recognition. As I called 911, he grabbed my wrist weakly. "Letter, in my mailbox, for you." But sirens were already approaching, and I had to run before my parents discovered my escape. When questioned by police, my parents played the concerned neighbors perfectly. They suggested Morrison might have staged the attack for attention, pointed out his obsession with their daughter, even offered their security footage, which conveniently showed nothing useful. The investigation went nowhere, but Morrison spent a week in the hospital. I spent that week locked in my room, my parents taking shifts guarding my door. "You did this," my mother spat during one of her guard duties. "Your encouragement made him bold. His blood is on your hands." The gaslighting was relentless, designed to make me question my own sanity. Maybe Morrison was dangerous. Maybe my parents were protecting me. Maybe I was the crazy one, seeing kindness where there was threat. But then I'd remember his broken face in that driveway, and I knew who the real monsters were. The letter Morrison mentioned haunted me, but I never got to read it. My parents intercepted all mail, probably destroyed anything from him immediately. Instead, they presented me with their ultimatum: leave for college under their conditions and never contact Morrison again, or stay home indefinitely under complete lockdown. The choice felt like death either way, but at least college offered the illusion of escape. I agreed to their terms, signed their contracts, and promised to be their obedient daughter. Inside, I was already planning my real education, learning the truth they'd killed themselves trying to hide. College was supposed to be my escape, but my parents transformed it into an extension of my prison with a longer leash. They'd chosen Blessed Heart University specifically for its conservative policies and isolated location. My host family, the Wheelers, were actually paid minders who reported my every movement. Mrs. Wheeler had been given a thick binder containing my schedule, approved friends list, and detailed instructions about monitoring my communications. She showed it to me proudly, like she was doing God's work. My roommate Emma seemed like a godsend at first. She was quirky, funny, and didn't bat an eye when I explained my parents were overprotective. We bonded over late-night study sessions and shared frustrations about the college's strict rules. For 3 months, she felt like my first real friend in years. Then I found the check from my parents in her desk drawer, payment for weekly reports about my activities, complete with photos she'd taken of me sleeping. "It's not personal," Emma said when confronted, not even bothering to deny it. "Your parents pay my tuition in exchange for updates. Do you know how expensive college is? Besides, they're right about that neighbor guy. The stuff they told me about him, you're lucky they care so much." She'd been coached well, repeating their lies with practiced sincerity. Every friendship I'd thought was real had been another transaction in my parents' economy of control. The monitoring extended beyond human spies. My laptop had tracking software that logged every keystroke. My phone was cloned, allowing them to read texts in real time. They'd even hired a private investigator to attend my classes undercover, sitting in the back row of my American literature course pretending to audit. When I changed my passwords, my father called within minutes, threatening to report my erratic behavior to the dean. Desperate for answers, I started researching my family history at the library, using computers they couldn't monitor. What I found shook me to my core. My maternal grandparents weren't dead as I'd been told my entire life. Martha Sullivan was living in a nursing home 40 minutes away, very much alive at 83. The receptionist recognized my mother's maiden name immediately. "Sarah's daughter? We wondered if she'd ever bring you by." Martha asks about her granddaughter constantly. Meeting my grandmother felt like stepping into an alternate reality. She was sharp, kind, and heartbroken by decades of estrangement. "Your mother cut us off when you were born," she explained, holding my hands with papery fingers. "We never understood why. She'd been so happy with William, planning such a beautiful future. Then suddenly she married that other man, moved away, and told everyone we were dead." "William?" I asked, though I already knew. "Morrison. William Morrison. Such a good man. He loved your mother desperately, would have done anything for her. They were engaged, you know. The wedding was planned, dress bought, everything. Then she disappeared for months and came back married to your father, pregnant with you." William was devastated. He tried to contact her for years, but she threatened restraining orders if he didn't stop. Our conversation was cut short when my parents burst in, having been alerted by the Wheelers that I'd left campus. The scene they caused was mortifying, accusing the nursing home of endangering a vulnerable young woman, threatening lawsuits, demanding to know what lies had been told. My grandmother watched sadly as they dragged me out, but not before pressing something into my palm. A photo of my mother in a wedding dress, standing next to William Morrison, both glowing with joy. The fallout was swift and brutal. They withdrew me from college mid-semester, claiming a family emergency. Back home, the prison walls grew thicker. They installed bars on my windows, explaining to concerned neighbors that I developed dangerous sleepwalking habits. The house alarm now included sensors on interior doors. My meals were brought to my room, and I noticed they tasted strange, leaving me drowsy and compliant. Finding the medication they'd been crushing into my food took weeks of pretending to be more sedated than I was. Risperdal, an antipsychotic, prescribed by a doctor who'd never actually examined me. When I palmed the pills instead of swallowing them, my mind cleared, but I had to maintain the act. Shuffling steps, vacant stares, mumbled responses. My parents seemed relieved by my pharmaceutical compliance, loosening their vigilance slightly. During one of their date nights, carefully maintained to project normalcy, I discovered my father's hidden office in the basement. The amount of surveillance equipment was staggering. Monitors showing every angle of Morrison's property, Boxes of photographs spanning years, recordings of his phone calls, copies of his emails, even his medical records somehow obtained. An entire wall was dedicated to tracking his movements, like something from a serial killer's lair. But it was the files on me that made my blood run cold. Every friend I'd ever had investigated. Every teacher evaluated for corruption risk. Psychological profiles theorizing about my susceptibility to manipulation. Plans for increasingly extreme interventions if I remained non-compliant. The final folder, labeled Last Resort, contained information about private facilities in Mexico, places that promised to reshape troubled young women. They were planning to make me disappear. Morrison's lawyer found me through sheer persistence, slipping a business card under my door while my parents were at their therapist. The message was brief. Morrison was dying of pancreatic cancer, had perhaps months left, and desperately needed to speak with me before it was too late. The lawyer could arrange a meeting, had legal documents that would change everything, but I had to come willingly. My hands shook as I flushed the card down the toilet, but the information was seared into my memory. The fifth betrayal came from someone who'd taken an oath to do no harm. Dr. Peterson had been my physician since childhood, the one adult I'd believed was outside my parents' influence. When I faked a severe allergic reaction to force a medical visit, hoping to report the forced medication, he listened to my story with apparent concern. Then he called my parents into the room and recommended increasing my dosage, discussing inpatient programs for severe delusional disorders centered around fixation on a neighbor. My escape attempt that night was born of pure desperation. I'd saved sleeping pills, planning to drug my parents' evening tea. But they'd anticipated even that, switching to bottled beverages they opened themselves. Instead, I triggered a small fire in the kitchen, hoping to run during the chaos. The smoke alarms brought the fire department, but my parents spun a story about their mentally ill daughter endangering the family. I spent 72 hours in psychiatric hold, diagnosed with disorders I didn't have by doctors who never questioned my parents' narrative. The walls were closing in. Morrison was dying, taking whatever truth he carried to his grave. My parents were preparing to have me permanently institutionalized. Every avenue of escape was blocked by their network of paid allies. I was 23 years old, legally an adult, but trapped in a web of medical fraud, financial control, and systematic gaslighting. Rock bottom felt close, but I had no idea how much further I could fall, or that salvation would come from the most unexpected source. The psychiatric hold had one unintended consequence my parents didn't anticipate. It created official documentation of their claims about my mental state. This paper trail would become crucial later, but at the time, it felt like another bar in my cage. Back home, they presented me with a treatment plan that included daily medication supervised by Mrs. Wheeler, who'd moved into our guest room as a full-time caretaker. The pretense of normal family life was abandoned in favor of complete control. I became an expert at deception, hiding clarity behind a mask of medication-induced compliance. During the day, I shuffled around the house, speaking in monotone responses, while at night I searched for truth. My father's office became my obsession, accessible only when they believed I was thoroughly sedated. The deeper I dug into his files, the more horrifying the conspiracy became. This wasn't just about keeping me from Morrison, it was about hiding something that could destroy them. Financial records revealed the extent of their surveillance network. They'd spent over $300,000 monitoring Morrison over the years, hiring multiple private investigators, paying informants, even bribing postal workers to intercept his mail. But more disturbing were the payments from an unnamed source, quarterly deposits of $50,000 marked only as maintenance of agreement. Someone was paying my parents to keep Morrison away from me. Hidden among surveillance photos, I found a document that made my hands tremble. A birth certificate, different from the one I'd always known. The father's name wasn't Robert Chin, the man who'd raised me. It was William Andrew Morrison. The dates aligned perfectly with my grandmother's story. My mother had already been pregnant when she married Robert. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. Morrison wasn't a dangerous stranger. He was my biological father, and my parents had stolen me from him. The confrontation with my mother came accidentally. She found me in the office at 3 a.m., holding the birth certificate. For a moment, we just stared at each other, years of lies hanging between us. Then she collapsed, not in her usual dramatic fashion, but with genuine, soul-deep exhaustion. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Robert saved us. William would have destroyed everything. He was going to take you away from me. He was my father." I screamed, 23 years of suppressed truth erupting. "You let me believe he was dangerous, let the whole neighborhood torment him, and he was my father." My mother's face crumpled as she began to speak, words tumbling out like a dam breaking. She'd been young, pregnant, and terrified. Robert had offered security, respectability, and a promise to raise me as his own. All she had to do was cut William out completely and never reveal the truth. But William wouldn't give up, she continued, tears streaming. He hired lawyers, demanded paternity tests, threatened to expose everything. Robert's family had money, connections. They made William's life hell until he agreed to stay away. But he never really did he? Always watching, always waiting for a chance to steal you back. Even in confession, she painted Morrison as the villain, unable to admit they'd been the monsters all along. My father, the man I'd called Dad for 23 years, heard the commotion and appeared in the doorway. Unlike my mother, his face showed no remorse, only cold calculation. "So you know," he said flatly, "changes nothing. I'm on your birth certificate. I raised you. Legally, morally, you're mine. That man is nothing but a sperm donor who couldn't accept rejection." The argument exploded into violence when I tried to leave. Robert grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I heard something pop in my shoulder. My mother screamed for him to stop, but he was beyond reason. 23 years of my life wasted on another man's bastard, he snarled. "The money I spent, the opportunities one lost, all because your whore mother couldn't keep her legs closed." I fought back with newfound fury, clawing at his face, kicking with survival instinct. The noise alerted Mrs. Wheeler, who called 911 when she saw Robert slam me against the wall. But even as police sirens approached, he hissed in my ear, "Morrison has weeks left. You'll never get your fairy tale reunion. I'll make sure of that." The police separated us, but my parents played their cards perfectly, presenting my psychiatric history, their concerns about violent outbursts, and Mrs. Wheeler's testimony about my delusions. The sixth betrayal was a chorus of family voices. Aunts, uncles, cousins I'd trusted all stepped forward to support my parents' version of events. They'd all known the truth, every single one, and chosen to perpetuate the lie. Aunt Helen spoke tearfully about my obsession with the neighbor, Cousin Derek testified about my increasing instability, and Uncle James, a police officer himself, vouched for Robert's character. The family court emergency hearing was a masterpiece of manipulation. But Morrison's lawyer was prepared. Thomas Brennan had been building a case for years, knowing this day would come. He appeared at the hearing with boxes of evidence. The original birth certificate, hospital records showing Morrison had been present at my birth before being forcibly removed, years of letters Morrison had written begging for contact with his daughter, proof of the systematic campaign to destroy his reputation. The judge ordered an immediate halt to all psychiatric treatment pending investigation. The revelation that Morrison was dying changed the legal timeline dramatically. Brennan pushed for an emergency temporary restraining order against my parents, arguing that their continued interference would deny a dying man his right to know his daughter. The judge, disturbed by the evidence of fraud and manipulation, granted it. For the first time in my life, I was legally free to see my biological father without interference. My parents made one last desperate attempt to stop me. They emptied my bank accounts, reported my car stolen, even called Morrison's hospital claiming I was dangerous. But Brennan had anticipated every move. He'd arranged safe transportation, secured temporary housing, and most importantly, made sure hospital security knew the truth. As I left my childhood home for what might be the last time, my mother grabbed my hand. "He's not who you think he is," she whispered. When you learn the whole truth, you'll understand why we did this. But I was done believing their version of truth. Whatever Morrison had done to lose my mother, it couldn't justify 23 years of torture for both of us. He'd lived next door to his daughter for over 2 decades, watching her grow up from afar, suffering daily torment from the people who'd stolen her. If that wasn't love, I didn't know what was. The real truth waited in a hospital room across town, carried by a dying man who'd never stopped fighting to be my father. Thomas Brennan met me at the hospital entrance, his expression mixing professional composure with human compassion. Before we go in, he said gently, "You need to know William has good days and bad days. The cancer has progressed significantly. Today is a good day, but he tires easily." He handed me a thick folder. "He wanted you to have this regardless of what happens. It's every letter he wrote you over 23 years, every birthday card he couldn't send, every Father's Day he spent alone." The walk to Morrison's room felt endless and instant simultaneously. When I entered, the man in the bed barely resembled the neighbor I'd known. Cancer had carved away everything excess, leaving behind pure essence. But his eyes, when they found mine, blazed with life. "Candace," he whispered, and in that single word, I heard decades of longing. "My beautiful daughter. You look just like your mother did when I fell in love with her." I collapsed into the chair beside him, words failing completely. He reached out with trembling fingers, and I took his hand, feeling the reality of connection after a lifetime of separation. "I'm sorry," we both said simultaneously, then laughed through our tears. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "Nothing that happened was your fault. Your mother was very young, and Robert's family had power I couldn't match." Over the next 3 hours, William Morrison, my father, filled in the deliberately erased chapters of my life. He and my mother had met in college, falling deeply in love. They'd dated for 3 years, gotten engaged, planned a life together. "She was everything," he said softly. "Brilliant, kind, full of dreams. We were going to travel the world, write books together, have beautiful children. You were conceived in love, Candace. Never doubt that." But Robert Chin had wanted my mother from the first day he saw her. Coming from a wealthy family with political connections, he was used to getting what he wanted. When Sarah chose me, Robert couldn't accept it. He started small, spreading rumors about me at the university where I was teaching, getting me suspended for fabricated complaints. Then he found out Sarah was pregnant, and everything escalated. The story that emerged was more disturbing than any dangerous stranger narrative. Robert's family had threatened not just William, but his entire family. His sister's children, his elderly parents, anyone he loved became potential targets. They made it clear, fight for you, and everyone I cared about would suffer. Disappear, and they'd leave my family alone. But I couldn't completely abandon you. So I made a deal. I could live wherever you were, see you from afar, but never make contact. "Then why move next door?" I asked, struggling to understand. "Why torture yourself being so close?" His smile was infinitely sad. "Because watching you grow up, even from a distance, was better than nothing. Every school play I attended hiding in the back, every birthday I watched through windows, every milestone I witnessed as a stranger, it was worth the pain. You were worth everything." My mother's betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. She'd taken Robert's money, signed documents denying William's paternity, even testified that he'd been abusive during their relationship. "I don't blame her entirely," William said, shocking me. "Robert's family showed her falsified evidence that I'd been with other women, made her believe I'd only wanted her for her trust fund. By the time she realized the truth, she was trapped in a marriage with a man who'd orchestrated everything." The real hero of the story was Thomas Brennan, William's lawyer and friend. For 23 years, he'd helped William document everything, building an ironclad case for when I was old enough to handle the truth. They'd waited until I was legally and financially independent, knowing my parents would use every weapon against me. "We almost contacted you when you turned 18, Brennan explained, "but you were still financially dependent. We couldn't risk them institutionalizing you permanently." William pulled out a tablet, showing me thousands of photos he'd taken over the years. Me at 5, playing in the yard while he watched from his window. At 10, walking to school as he followed at a distance to ensure I was safe. At 16, crying on the porch after a fight with my parents while he sat on his side, wishing he could comfort me. I documented everything he said. Someday, I hoped you'd want to see that I was always there. The medical equipment beeped, reminding us of limited time. William gripped my hand tighter. There's more you need to know. Your mother tried to leave Robert when you were 7. She came to me, begging for help, saying she'd made a terrible mistake. But Robert had anticipated that too. He'd had her sign documents that would paint her as an unfit mother, threaten her with losing custody entirely. So she stayed, and her guilt turned to resentment toward me. The night they hurt you, I said, remembering him beaten in his driveway. Was that because of me? He shook his head. That was because I'd finally gathered enough evidence to challenge the custody arrangement legally. Robert panicked. The beating was a warning, but also a mistake. It created a police record, showed their violence. Brennan used it to expedite everything. A nurse entered, insisting William needed rest, but he waved her away desperately. The box, he told Brennan urgently. The lawyer produced a small safety deposit box, handing me the key. Everything's in there. Your real birth certificate, DNA test results I had done from items you discarded, proof of the payments Robert's family made, recordings of their threats. But more importantly, letters from your mother before she changed, photos of us together, proof that you were conceived in love. As visiting hours ended, I found myself unwilling to leave. This man, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, was my father in every way that mattered. He'd sacrificed his entire life to simply exist near me, enduring decades of abuse for glimpses of his daughter. I'll be back tomorrow, I promised, and he smiled through tears. I've waited 23 years. I can wait another day. But as I left the hospital, I saw my parents' car in the parking garage. They sat inside, watching, waiting. My mother's face was swollen from crying, but Robert's expression remained coldly determined. They couldn't legally stop me anymore, but I understood their presence was a message. This wasn't over. Whatever happened with William, they would find a way to make me pay for choosing him over the lie they'd built. Brennan walked me to his car, his own expression grim. William doesn't know this yet, but the doctors called earlier. The cancer has spread to his brain. He might have days, not weeks. We need to move fast if you want him to meet his grandchildren someday, to give him that hope. I nodded, understanding. Tomorrow, I'd bring him photos of the future I planned, the life he'd fought to be part of. Tonight, I'd read 23 years of unsent letters from a father who never stopped loving me. William Morrison died 3 days later, holding my hand as dawn broke through the hospital windows. His last words were, "Tell your mother I forgive her. Tell yourself I love you. Tell the world I existed." The peace on his face as he passed was profound, a man finally allowed to be a father after decades of exile. I sat with him for an hour afterward, memorizing the face I'd been denied my entire life, promising to make his suffering mean something. The funeral preparations revealed the true William Morrison, not the monster my parents had created. Thomas Brennan took me to William's real home, not the modest rental next door, but a beautiful estate an hour away. He'd maintained the rental solely to be near me, living in an empty house for 23 years. His real life was here, in rooms filled with my photos, walls covered in my artwork saved from trash bins, shelves holding every report card and achievement he'd managed to collect. He was quite wealthy, Brennan explained, showing me through the house. Inherited from his parents, invested wisely, lived frugally. He spent most of it on charity, specifically organizations that helped children separated from parents. The Morrison Foundation has reunited over 200 families torn apart by custody battles, kidnappings, and false allegations. You inspired all of it. The study contained meticulous records of his search for justice. Legal bills totaling millions, private investigators hired to ensure my safety when my parents' behavior escalated, donations to my schools ensuring I had opportunities they couldn't control. He'd been my guardian angel, protecting me in every way the law allowed. One wall displayed newspaper clippings about missing children he'd helped find, each success a salve for his own loss. Planning his funeral became an education in the man my parents had tried to erase. Hundreds of people came forward with stories. The local animal shelter he'd funded, the scholarship programs he'd established, the legal aid society he'd supported for parents fighting unjust custody arrangements. Former students from his teaching days flew in from around the world. Each person painted the same picture, a kind, generous man whose personal tragedy had fueled decades of helping others. My parents attempted to attend the funeral, arriving with their entire extended family like an occupying force. But William had anticipated even this. Security, comprised of off-duty police officers who knew the real story, politely but firmly turned them away. Robert threatened lawsuits, my mother wailed about being denied closure, but the other mourners formed a protective wall around me. These strangers who'd known my father better than I had became my temporary family. The service itself was standing room only. Colleagues, students, beneficiaries of his charity, and families he'd helped reunite filled every seat. The eulogies painted a portrait of a man who'd channeled unbearable loss into purpose. William never gave up hope, one speaker said. Even when the law failed him, when money and power won temporarily, he believed truth and love would prevail. Today, with Candace here, they finally have. Thomas Brennan read William's final letter to the assembled mourners. In it, my father forgave everyone who'd wronged him, expressed gratitude for the time he'd had near me, and urged others to fight for their children no matter the odds. But the most powerful moment came when a woman approached the podium uninvited. She was in her 50s, elegantly dressed, with eyes that seemed familiar. "My name is Diana Morrison," she said. "William was my brother. And Candace, you have a family who's waited 23 years to meet you." The revelation that I had aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd been forced to stay away under threat opened new wounds and began healing them simultaneously. Diana explained how Robert's family had systematically threatened every Morrison relative, using their wealth and influence to ensure complete separation. "We held secret Christmas celebrations for you," she wept, embracing me. "Birthday parties with empty chairs." William shared every photo, every scrap of information. "You've been loved by so many people you never knew existed." After the service, Brennan took me aside for the reading of the will. William had left everything to me, the houses, the foundation, investment accounts worth millions. But more importantly, he'd left detailed instructions for using the wealth to continue his work. "He didn't want you burdened by money," Brennan explained. "He wanted you empowered by it. There's enough here to live comfortably while funding the foundation's mission forever." That evening, my mother appeared at my hotel room door. The restraining order had limits, and she'd found a loophole. She looked destroyed, aged a decade in days. "I need you to know the truth," she begged. "The whole truth. About why I made the choices I did." Against Brennan's advice, but following my heart, I let her in. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. "I was 19 when I met William," she began. 20 when I got pregnant. Robert had been stalking me throughout college, but I thought I could handle him. When he found out about the pregnancy, he showed me things, photos that looked like William with other women, documents suggesting he'd abandoned previous children, testimonies from women claiming abuse. I know now they were all fabricated, but I believed them then. The story she told matched William's, but added layers of manipulation I hadn't imagined. Robert had isolated her from friends, intercepted William's attempts at contact, and slowly convinced her that keeping me from my biological father was protecting me. By the time I realized the truth, you were 7. I'd already signed documents saying William was dangerous, already taken Robert's money. If I'd tried to leave, I would have lost you entirely. So I convinced myself the lie was better than losing you. "But you let him live next door for 16 years, I said, struggling to understand. "You watched him suffer, let Dad torment him, turned the neighborhood against him. How could you do that to someone you once loved?" She broke down completely then, raw truth spilling out between sobs. because every day he was there reminded me of my cowardice. His presence was proof of the life I should have chosen. It was easier to hate him than hate myself. We talked until dawn, unraveling 23 years of deception. She revealed that the mysterious payments came from Robert's father, a prominent judge who'd orchestrated everything to prevent scandal. That Robert had never wanted me but saw me as the price of owning her. That she'd tried to leave multiple times, but was always pulled back by threats and manipulation. By the end, I didn't forgive her, but I began to understand the prison she'd built for herself was as confining as mine. The next months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Robert was arrested for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and multiple other charges. The evidence William had compiled was overwhelming. My mother testified against him in exchange for immunity, finally choosing truth over self-preservation. The trial exposed a network of corruption including judges, police officers, and social workers who'd been paid to maintain the lie. I threw myself into running the Morrison Foundation, finding purpose in continuing William's work. Every family reunited felt like honoring his memory. His biological children from other relationships reached out, welcoming me as the sister they'd been denied. I learned he'd had a brief marriage after losing my mother, producing 2 sons who'd grown up hearing about their missing sister. Building those relationships helped fill the void his death left. At William's grave, I installed a bench where I sit monthly, telling him about the life I'm building. About my work with the foundation, my growing relationship with his family, my careful reconciliation with my mother. About the children I hope to have someday, who'll know their grandfather through the legacy of love he left. About how his sacrifice wasn't in vain, how truth did finally prevail. The most profound lesson from this journey isn't about the danger of secrets or the power of truth. It's that sometimes the people we're warned against are the ones trying to save us, while those claiming to protect us are the real threat. My parents spent 23 years painting William Morrison as dangerous, but the only danger he ever posed was to their carefully constructed lies. He was dangerous to deception, dangerous to manipulation, dangerous to those who would separate a father from his child. In the end, love won. It took 23 years, cost immeasurable pain, and required one man's entire life as payment. But love won. William Morrison died knowing his daughter, and I live knowing my father. That's the truth that matters, the only truth that ever did. What family secrets might be hiding in your own life? Have you ever wondered if the dangerous people you've been warned about might actually be the ones worth knowing? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that truth always finds a way. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell for more stories that remind us that sometimes the most profound love comes from the most unexpected places. Thank you for letting me share my father's story with you. May you always have the courage to seek truth, even when those closest to you insist on comfortable lies.